I think my purpose in life might be rescuing things from the trash. I mean, come on, look at this lamp. Look at these curves. This thing does not belong in a landfill. So after I found this lamp, I brought it home, plugged it, put a new bulb in it, plugged it in, and it turned on. But then one day later, it stopped working. So there's obviously something up with the wiring, and that's my goal today, is to take this apart, figure out what's going on, and potentially just rewire the lamp. I have not done this before, but it seems like a pretty straightforward project. I'm gonna see what I find when I open it up, and we'll take it from there. It's freezing outside, so I'm not gonna be doing this in my garage. Oh, a stink bug. Get out of here, bug. Come on. So I'm first just trying to take this all apart. I don't quite know how it comes apart, but I think mainly these floor lamps screw together. So I'm just trying like the obvious places where things might be screwed together and seeing if they come apart. Depending on the lamp shape, it might not be necessary to totally disassemble it to rewire it. However, the shorter the pieces are, generally it's going to be easier to thread new wire through, so that's a consideration. This lamp also had several sharp angles and bends to it, so I figured it would be a good idea to at least take those parts apart to make it easier on myself to put the new wire through. It also ended up being super helpful to have this all on camera when it came time to reassemble. So hot tip, if you do this at home, take some photos or videos as you're disassembling so you know how to reassemble it later. So I got these two components at the hardware store yesterday. This is the cord with the plug already attached to it, and this is the lamp socket. So I think I just need to thread this up through the lamp base, hook everything back up correctly, and we should be good to go. I wanted to get a longer cord, but this was all they had. You can buy all these components separately, like the plug, the wire, and the socket. And I was gonna do that so that I could have a longer cord, because you can buy them in like much longer lengths. But the plugs that they have at the hardware store, at least near me, are all like really bulky. And I didn't really want that. So I opted to go with the shorter wire with the plug that wasn't super ugly. I was trying to avoid disassembling the main part of the lamp, but I couldn't quite get the cord through. So I ended up taking it apart in hopes that the internal rod came apart into some shorter lengths, but that wasn't the case. Well, that doesn't really help me because the pipe is just as long. It doesn't come apart in the middle. So I still have to thread it through just as long of a section. Now that I was able to get this part, I feel like this is the time to repaint this. I'm gonna do that. I don't know what I was thinking when I originally decided I was gonna just rewire and not paint this lamp, because it clearly needs a paint job. So I'm glad I pivoted while this was all taken apart. After I finished disassembling everything, I took all the pieces I was going to paint out to the garage to prep them. Okay, I've got the parts that I need to sand here, and I'm just gonna give them a light sand. The one that's in pretty bad shape, it'll need a bit more sanding, but the others is just kind of to like scuff up the surface so the paint has something to adhere to. So here we go. I'm using a medium grit sandpaper here, I think 150, which was rough enough to get the flaky paint off, but gentle enough to leave the surface smooth enough to paint. So unless you've got a really rough surface to sand down, a medium grit paper somewhere between like 120 and 220 grit will probably do the job. Even though the base of the lamp was really the only part that needed painting, I decided to paint all of the black components to make sure there wasn't going to be a color mismatch. But for the brass looking pieces, I'm just painting the little components because they're not actually brass, and the plating or paint or whatever it was on there, I'm not sure, but it was coming off. So I'm sanding those down here too. The curved neck of the lamp is solid brass though, so I'm leaving that as is. To get all the dust off of these after sanding, I just washed everything with dish soap and some warm water and then just set them out on some towels to dry while I went to Home Depot to pick out some paint. I brought this little end cap with me so I could color match the brass as best I could, and then I went with a semi-gloss black for the body of the lamp. Painting itself was complicated by the fact that it was below freezing outside, which is too cold for the paint to really dry properly. So what I ended up doing was painting in my garage, but then letting everything dry in my basement with the windows open. So in the garage, I'm going to put down like a, I'm going to put down a piece of plastic to catch the overspray, but then I'll put the parts on these pieces of cardboard so that I can quickly bring them back inside to dry. I started off with a coat of primer. I probably only needed to prime the bottom piece that was sanded down to like raw metal, but since I was already set up for this, I just primed everything because it's not going to hurt, and then I was starting off with a nice consistent base coat on all the pieces. And right when I was done priming, I brought everything inside to the warm basement to let it dry for about an hour. And then I brought it all back outside to paint. This was kind of an annoying step to have to take, but the alternative was basically like waiting until spring, and I didn't want to do that. So this worked out for me to be able to do this all in the winter. So while I was painting in my garage, it started snowing very lightly, and that really like screwed up my paint job because between my garage and my basement door, when I was carrying a couple of the pieces in, they got snowed on, and obviously the snow melted into water, and now there are like little water droplet marks on a couple of the pieces. I could lightly sand and repaint them. I'm gonna not do that right now because I don't want to go through this process of like painting in the cold and bringing them inside. My house smelled like spray paint for like a day, even though they were in the basement and the windows were open and all of that. It still like permeated a little bit, and I just don't want to be in that smell again. If it's bothering me later, I can always just do another coat once it's warmer out, and I can let it like dry and cure outside. So that's my plan. Let's get back into it. So here's the newly painted bottom. It has this inlet for the cord. So I'm feeding that through here first before I feed it then up through this like main rod of the lamp. Ugh, horrid noise. I attached this little like fishing, it's not a fishing line, I'm calling it that because I'm fishing the wire through with it, but it's just a thin wire that is going to be easier to thread through here. So I'm going to put that all the way in, and then I can use it to help me pull the thicker wire through. This made it so much easier. So I'm just lightly pulling the lighter wire from the top as I'm pushing the lamp cord up through the bottom, and it was really easy to get through like that. Now the top of this is coming out here, and I'm going to reassemble this part of the lamp and then get to rewiring the top. A lot of these small pieces were just slightly different from each other, so I was very grateful to have the video of me taking it apart to look back at, which I did many times. So the main body of the lamp is really all just held in place by this one nut, which is kind of crazy, but it seems to be holding it down just fine. Once I got that reassembled, I fed the wire up through the curved piece before screwing that back on, and then it was time to wire the socket. So I just made the assumption that all of these replacement sockets with this type of knob have a removable knob, which apparently is not true. So this knob does not come off, and I need it to be able to reassemble the lamp just because of the way that this lamp is set up. So I have to go back to the hardware store. Would it even be a DIY if I didn't have an unplanned trip to Home Depot? So I got these two things. I think this is everything I need. Also, I determined that this I just ripped it to shreds, but this is called a three-way socket, as opposed to just an on-off socket, which I had before. And this will, when paired with a three-way bulb, let me have 3 different settings of light. So rather than a dimmer switch, this is an alternative that lets you have different levels of light. So that's cool. Let's try this again. So this screws onto the top of the threaded like tube that all the wires go through. Now this is what was missing from the last one. I can unscrew this and remove it. And then once this is installed, I'll screw it back on through here. When that part screws on, it will tighten this down and hold it in place. So with this type of socket, you're supposed to tie this knot called an underwriter's knot that gets closed inside the socket. And it helps keep the wires in place and keep tension off the actual electrical connections. So they stay put and they stay safe over time. On these wires, there's usually one that has ribbing on the outside and one that's smooth. This one is ribbed. And the ribbed one is typically the neutral. I'm no electrician, but this is just the basics of what I know. The ribbed one's usually the neutral, and the neutral connects to the silver screw in this case, and the hot wire connects to the brass screw. So I'm gonna connect those. Another tip with making these connections is to make a small hook at the end of the wire so it wraps easily around the terminal screw, and then wrap it around clockwise. That way, when you're tightening the screw down, you're reinforcing the direction of the wire with the movement of the screw, not fighting against it. And that just helps to keep it all like solidly in place. And then I just kind of worked the knot up as high as it would go so that it would take up as little room as possible. And then worked on screwing the bottom piece of the socket into the top of the lamp. This was kind of tricky just because I was trying to do that at like the narrow bottom of this cone, but I was able to screw it down using some needle nose pliers. Once that was all tightly on there, then the top half of the socket just kind of clicks down into place. And I just fed the extra wire down through the lamp and out the bottom. And with that, the hard part was done. I finished reassembling the shade, and then it was time to test it out. Cool. Yay. So I have the perfect place for this lamp. I'm gonna set it up next to this table. This is just like kind of in between my dining room and my living room. I have this little table by this window. I use it a lot, but at night there isn't any light right next to it. There used to be a chandelier hanging there. It was a very odd place for that, and I took it out. So at night, this table isn't really that useful. So I'm gonna put this lamp next to it, and I think it fits there well.